Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up. Final thoughts, Packers regular season finale, and unless something absolutely diabolically crazy happens, this will be the last game at Lambeau Field for the season. The only way it is not is if Green Bay wins and the Cowboys beat Washington, and Green Bay's the 6th seed, and somehow the 6th seed Green Bay matches up with the 7th seed Washington in the NFC Championship, which, yeah, this will be the finale at Lambeau Field for the 2024 campaign for the Green Bay Packers as they welcome in their NFC North rival in the Chicago Bears. One big topic kind of swirling around this one on Green Bay's side, put to bed pretty early. I don't even think it was brought up on Chicago's side, which kind of piqued my interest a little bit, but it's the rest players. Are we playing players? What's sort of the strategy? Because if you're Green Bay, you're in the playoffs. Like, win, lose, draw, you're a wild card team. You know, Detroit, Minnesota's the big one on Sunday night. They're playing for not only the division, but the 1 seed, which is crazy. There's going to be a 14-win team in the NFC that's a 5 seed, which is kind of crazy, and it brings up a larger topic and debate of if, you know, seeding should just go by record, because either Detroit or Minnesota are going to go 14-3, and they're going to have to hit the road for the playoffs, which is a bit absurd. But the resting players, do you do it, do you not do it in this matchup? A lot of people factor in the rivalry itself, but Green Bay's got a wild card spot. But they could still be the 6th seed, which does matter. I said in last week's video, I think a couple of them, I'd rather go to LA or Tampa or Atlanta, and I only think LA and Tampa are options for Green Bay. I'd rather play the Rams or the Bucs, call me crazy, than go to Philly right out of the chute, wild card weekend. And there's layers to it. If you're going to Philly round 1, you're the 7 seed. If you beat the Eagles, it doesn't matter what the hell else happens, those other 2 wild card games in the NFC. You beat the 2 seed, you're playing the 1 seed the following week. Green Bay had to do it last year as the 7 seed, went to Dallas, beat the crap out of the Cowboys, then played the 1 seed San Francisco 49ers, almost knocked them off in Santa Clara. So yeah, I'd rather, for a bevy of reasons, have Green Bay be the 6th and the 7th. So there is an incentive for the Packers to play their guys. Matt LaFleur didn't waste any time. He said the guys that are healthy, they're going to play. We're going to play our normal starters, things of that nature. I agree with that. If someone, heaven forbid, goes down for the Packers, a starter or multiple guys, I would still say it was the right decision to play the starters in this game. If Green Bay was like locked into the 7 seed, or if they were locked into the 6 seed or the 5 seed, or if they were like Kansas City and they already had the 1 seed and the bye wrapped up, then I think you have a larger discussion about whether or not to rest guys or play them. I think the fact that it's against Chicago, my personal belief, like, it's always fun beating the Bears, and Green Bay's done that 11 times in a row, but to me that has very little to do with it. I think you have to look at the grander scheme and the larger picture of things for the Packers, and that's the postseason. It's nice to beat Chicago, but if they had their spots cemented in, then I would be open to the dialogue and the discussion of whether or not to sit guys in this one. They're not going to do that. Is it likely they get the 6th seed? Well, they have to beat Chicago, which seems likely because they're playing their starters against the Bears, and then they need a Dallas upset of Washington, and the Cowboys with Cooper Rush already beat Washington in D.C. this year, so it's not impossible. It just seems, there's plenty of motivation for Washington in their game, in its game against Dallas as well. I looked at the flip side of this, though. Again, Mitch, I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Trying to build this thing up. Final thoughts, Packers, Bears, Week 18 at Lambeau Field. Chicago's angle of this is very, very peculiar to me for a couple of reasons. No one really brought up, and maybe in Bears circles they did, and I didn't watch Thomas Brown press conferences this week. I haven't seen a single story, inkling, note, anything that would hint at Chicago resting players, and I wouldn't expect them to go, full go resting starters in this game. They haven't won since, October 13th. Like, they're on a 10-game losing streak. They've been out of it forever, and this was supposed to be the year. All I heard over and over and over again all offseason, Chicago, they're the king of the offseason. Every single freaking offseason, the Bears make a couple of moves and their fan base goes crazy and says, this is going to now we turn the page. Now we figured it out. Now we go on a run. Now we start winning division titles. Never freaking happens. They haven't won a game since October 13th. I was told this quarterback, Caleb Williams, number 1 overall pick out of USC, that there had never been a rookie quarterback surrounded with more talent and more stability than what Caleb Williams had. And look at all these weapons with Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, DeAndre Swift, so on and so forth, Cole Kmet, and dud. And I'm watching an offense last week against Seattle put up 3 points. Not very good for Chicago. But to circle back, I thought just with the amount of hits, sacks, the brutality of it for Caleb Williams, he is their franchise guy. I still believe if they bring in the right coach with competence and they build an offensive line through free agency and the draft, I don't think they can get it done just with one of those options. There's no loophole here for Chicago. I do believe Caleb Williams can still be a pretty good quarterback in the NFL. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've said this going back to not only Green Bay's first matchup, but when I did an NFC North kind of overview back in like week 3 or 4. I think Caleb Williams can be a pretty good quarterback. The amount of hits he's taken, the toll that's had to have on his body, and a lot of the sacks, he said it this week. I did watch one of his press conferences. 67 sacks this year. Caleb Williams is the most sacked quarterback in the National Football League. Wasn't even close. 67 times he's been sacked. He said this week in a press conference, a lot of them are his fault. Running around backwards. The thing with Caleb Williams is a lot of people were worried that things he did in college, they just don't work in the NFL. And one of those is when you're running around so much in the backfield and then you end up turning around, you have your back faced away from the play because you're trying to really get out of a disaster, but it only makes it a worse situation, and you're trying to double down and triple down, and it doesn't work. Caleb Williams has still tried to do those things this year in the NFL, and it does not work. And he's had sacks of like large magnitude. I'm talking about like big-time yardage lost because he's doing, one semicircle, then another semicircle, and he's running around because he doesn't like to give up on plays, which is something you admire but can also get you in a hell of a lot of trouble in the NFL. I'm surprised Chicago, to an extent, is not sitting Caleb Williams in this game. Now, some might say, oh, what sign does that send, your rookie quarterback? Well, like, Chicago should be thinking big picture. Like, big picture for Green Bay right now is the postseason. Big picture for Chicago is this dude has been sacked 67 times. I just watched the game last week against Seattle where it was consistent pass rush from the Seahawks, consistent pressure on Caleb Williams and in his face. QB hits, QB pressure, sacks, you name it, Seattle did it defensively in a 6-3 win over the Bears. I would sit the kid, and I know a lot of people are going to be against that. I get the other side of the coin, but when you're weighing like risk-reward, like from the Packers' perspective, it's, hey, we could still get the 6th seed. How much does that matter, 6th seed versus 7th seed? To me, it matters a lot. To Green Bay, it obviously does because they're still playing their starters in this game against Chicago. For Chicago, the risk-reward of playing Caleb Williams or not, I don't see the reward. Even if they beat the Packers are like, okay, we're still going to the playoffs. I guess you snap the 11-game losing streak, and that is something that's a dark cloud that follows that organization around until they snap it. So I get that, but at the expense of your quarterback taking more abuse, and I know you can really like tunnel vision this, and if you're Chicago and say, look, it's just one more game, it's 4 quarters, it's 60 minutes, he's probably going to get beat up a little bit more. The Packers pass rush looked like it was coming on, then it disappeared, especially last week against Minnesota, but they should be able to beat up on a pretty bad Chicago offensive line. And so if you're the Bears, you're probably thinking he wants to finish the year off right. He wants to show his teammates, hey, I'm still out here in the huddle with you guys. I'm bringing the lunch pail. I'm going to work. Let's get this job done. Let's finish this season on a high note, or at least try to. I just risk reward when I'm weighing that. I would, if I were in the shoes of whoever's making that decision for the Bears. I don't know if that's Thomas Brown. I don't know if that's Ryan Poles. I don't know if it's the McCaskies. I don't know. But I'm just surprised there wasn't more chatter or rumblings about the idea of sitting Caleb Williams for this game. Because everyone brought up Green Bay's side of it, which makes sense, and Matt LaFleur quickly shut it down. But Caleb Williams is a rookie quarterback who's been, the most sacked quarterback in the National Football League at 67. I think it'd be very easy if he wasn't under constant duress to be like, yeah, we're going to play Caleb Williams, but because of the abuse he's taken in the pocket and outside of the pocket this year, just kind of surprised. And I get the incentive, if you want to bring up that word again, I get the incentive of wanting to rid themselves of the 11-game losing streak to Green Bay, but man, you're somewhat playing with fire. And also, this isn't 2 years ago. This isn't a scenario anywhere close to when Detroit came into Green Bay Week 18 2 seasons ago, which ended up being Aaron Rodgers' last time in a Packers uniform. This is not comparable to the situation Chicago will be entering Sunday. The Detroit game 2 years ago, Detroit was eliminated from postseason contention the final week of the season, just a few hours before kickoff at Lambeau Field. And to stack even more incentive on it for the Lions, it was win and in for the Packers. If they would have beat the Lions on Sunday Night Football 2 years ago, it was the last game of the regular season. Green Bay's in. They get the playoff spot. If not, they're done. They're out. And who was it? Seattle, I think, ended up getting in. Geno Smith in the Seattle Seahawks. I believe that's how it went down. And Detroit came out with their hair on fire. Of course, Dan Campbell playing all his guys, motivated them to a T. Detroit got to play the role of spoiler. They played it perfectly. They beat the Packers. They ended Green Bay's season. And at the time, no one knew this, but it ended up being Aaron Rodgers' last game in a Packers uniform. And so the incentive for Detroit was, hey, we're playing the role of spoiler. We're pissed off because we just got eliminated from potentially getting a wild card spot, just a few hours prior to kickoff. Not only can we spoil Green Bay's season, though, we can be the sole reason they don't make the postseason. That's not the situation or scenario that Chicago's entering itself into. Green Bay's already in the playoffs. 6 or 7 seed isn't, it's not, to me, it matters a good amount because I don't want Green Bay going to Philly. I think they can beat Philly, but the path is just that much harder as the 7 seed. But this isn't, hey, if Green Bay wins, they're the 1 seed, they win the division, they get a bye, or they're a wild card team, like what Detroit, Minnesota are duking it out for. And so it's not a similar scenario. The only thing I can cling on to for Chicago is a team that just really, again, desperately wants to end this season on somewhat of a high note and rid themselves of an 11-game losing streak to the Green Bay Packers. The longest win streak, Green Bay at 11 games right now over Chicago, the longest win streak in this rivalry for either team, and it dates back decades and decades and decades and decades. And I mentioned Chicago. They haven't won since October 13th. It was a 35-16 win over Jacksonville. I think that was across the pond, right? Was that a London game? I think that was a London game. And they beat Jacksonville, and the Bears moved to 4-2 on the season, and they're about to be 5-2 the following week, and then they give up that Hail Mary to Washington quite literally as time expires. They lose to the Commanders on a Hail Mary, a true Hail Mary too. It wasn't like a 30, 35-yard pass like Jaden Daniels had to let that puppy sling, and they won on a Hail Mary, beat Chicago, and the Bears haven't won since before that. It's crazy. October 13th. Think about how long ago that seems. The NBA season hadn't even started the last time the Bears won a game. Regular season for the NBA had not even started the last time the Bears won a game. That's crazy. NHL was just starting. College football was right in the swing of getting conference play going. Now we're down to the final 4 teams. Now the NBA is almost at the halfway point of the regular season. Bears haven't won. October 13th, it's just... And they were 4-2. It wasn't like they were, 2-4 and a team that was starting. They were 4-2 and riding a little bit high, about to be 5-2, take out Washington. You know what really sucks? Wow, full circle here. I just thought of this. There's 1,000 things that happen throughout a season, so this is not the sole reason why. And who knows how things pan out differently, because there's obviously a chain reaction to this. If Chicago knocks down that Hail Mary attempt and they move to 5-2 on the season and Washington gets a loss, if everything else would have stayed the same, which of course it probably wouldn't have, after that, Green Bay beats Chicago this week and they're the 6th seed. Instead, Washington wins on that Hail Mary. Now Green Bay needs Washington to lose this week into Dallas, and Green Bay has to beat Chicago for the Packers to leapfrog the Commanders. That's kind of crazy. I'm so glad the Bears lost. Midge, I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Trying to build this puppy up. Packers, Bears, final thoughts, Week 18, Lambeau Field. There's a Jordan Love dilemma I wanted to talk about for a couple of minutes today, or maybe a few minutes. I'm trying to think back to last year. The second half was so good. The first half was a little bit rocky, but he was a first-year starter. I'm going to go just with this year because I can't really pinpoint specifics. The first half of this year, or maybe a little bit more than that, Jordan Love showed all the makings of just being a ruthless gunslinger. And I mean that not as like a put down in any sense. It's somewhat of a compliment, wildly entertaining to watch. And a lot of people were already drawing the Jordan Love, Brett Favre, just the playing style. Like, this dude will try to thread the damn needle. That's what Jordan Love was doing first half of the year, a little bit of change little bit of change, 8-9 games, more than slicing it right down the middle. I forget what game it was. He wore a Brett Favre jersey. Was that into the Vikings game back in September? He wore a Favre jersey into the stadium and then went out and, it was the Vikings game. He wore the Favre jersey into Lambeau Field and then threw 3 picks against Minnesota in a very Favre-esque performance to an extent. But, the only reason I didn't like the Love-Favre comparisons that people were throwing out there is because people were only doing it to bring up, Favre threw a ton of picks and Love's throwing a ton of picks. Brett Favre is a Hall of Fame quarterback. He's one of the greatest to ever do it. And I'm not wearing biased goggles when I say that. Brett Favre was one of the all-time greats. And so if you're going to compare him to Jordan Love or compare Love to him, it's got to be the positives too. Threading the needle. Jordan Love loved to do that, no pun intended. In those first 8-9 games, Brett Favre made a living off that. And Brett Favre had many jaw-dropping completions by threading the needle. And there was such a child's joy to the game with which Brett Favre played. Now, you see it with Jordan Love, but not to the extent I think that we saw with Favre. But the first half of the season, Jordan Love, ruthless gunslinger. First 8 games, 11 interceptions. I'll say it one more time. Sometimes when you throw out stats, if you say it twice, I find even with myself, it helps you just sort of digest it a little bit. You remember it better if I say it twice. First 8 games, Jordan Love had 11 interceptions. Last 6, 0. First 8 games, 11 interceptions. Last 6, 0. Now, on the surface, you would say, awesome, tremendous. 11 interceptions in 8 games, 0 the last 6. That's great. Things must be going swimmingly. You have to ask at what cost this came at for Jordan Love. And I wonder if there were conversations with Jordan about reining it in a bit that now has him being more gun-shy to try and thread that needle that we saw him doing so much earlier in the season. I don't know the deep dive numbers. I don't have them in front of me. But I can tell you that the eye test the last few weeks has shown at least me, and I'm sure many of you, the pass game just looks different. More hesitant, more uncertainty. And, Watson missed the game against Minnesota, but outside of that, they've been pretty healthy. Dobbs missed a couple of games with a concussion, but there hasn't been an instance this year that I can recall where it's wow, they're missing Dobbs and Watson, or they're missing Wicks and Reed, or Watson and Wicks. And they've been fairly healthy. Tucker Kraft, incredible at tight end. He's been healthy. And so it's not health being the problem. The pass game has looked off. It's looked hesitant. I don't think Love passed for over 200 yards against New Orleans or Minnesota, which isn't a be-all, end-all indicator. But in this offense, when you're not throwing for over 200 yards, it kind of is a head-scratcher to me. And the last thing you want Jordan Love doing is overthinking or worrying about throwing a pick, so much so that he's second-guessing himself or being hesitant. I'm not suggesting with certainty that is what is happening. But I do think we're seeing a version of Jordan Love that is being more careful, which, again, on the surface sounds good in nature, but at what expense is it costing the offense? Just haven't seen him try to thread it, which, again, you might say is a good thing, but once in a while you want to stretch out the defense. You want to try to take the lid off or at least keep them honest. I remember one pass last week to Bo Melton that he chucked up down the near sideline in single coverage, and the safety help ended up coming over, and by the time the ball dropped innocently out of bounds, it could have been, deemed to be double coverage. Outside of that, just not many deep shots. And, Matt LaFleur's offense is not, in my opinion, predicated on, throwing up a million deep shots downfield. But you still have to pick your spots. And I thought Jordan Love did a great job of that early on in the season, and sometimes it led to interceptions. And I get that. There was one play in particular against the Rams. I'm trying to remember who he threw it to. It was Jaden Reed. And Love chucked it up, and it was underthrown against the Rams. Triple coverage. And it was underthrown, and Jaden Reed came back to the ball, made the catch. And that was one of those throws where you're like, man, what is Jordan Love thinking? But he flung it 40-some yards down the field, 50-some yards down the field, and he just gave his guy a chance. Somewhat of a high-risk throw, but if they pick it, they're buried inside their own 10, inside their own 5. Jaden Reed comes back, makes the play. We have not seen Jordan Love attempt many of those throws in the last few weeks. And so I'm wondering, the interception numbers being down. It sounds good. It is good. You're 0 picks last 6 games. But has the aggressiveness and that mindset been taken away from Jordan Love? I don't know. I don't have those answers. All I can do is judge off the eye test. And the eye test would tell me this has become a fairly conservative passing game. Would not call it a conservative offense. They're still running, play action. Didn't see much orbit or jet motion against Minnesota, which kind of surprised me, but hopefully they'll get back to that against Chicago and then the postseason. But this passing game seems to have lost some aggressiveness. And I do wonder if those talks were had with Jordan Love about, whether or not to try to rein it in a little bit. We can't be taking risk. You win the turnover battle, you feel good about your chances to win any game. You lose the turnover battle, you're not feeling too good. But there has to be a happy medium or a compromise. No? Like there just has to be some sort of compromise where Jordan Love can be aggressive, have that mindset to be aggressive, but also just not make the dumb ones. Like the one to Jaden Reed, triple coverage, I can see it in my mind when I close my eyes. Triple coverage against the Rams. Packers catch it, or Reed catches it. 1st and goal, you're set up perfectly, but it was one of those passes where you're like, oh my gosh, he's just chucking up a prayer. But it's somewhat low risk because if it is, I think it was a 3rd down too. If it's an interception, it's basically deemed as like a really good punt because they're buried inside their 10 then. We just haven't seen those. But you got to get, like the dumb interceptions, the one that always comes to mind is the one against the Lions. Going into half, you're down 1 possession at a worst case scenario, and they set up what looked like a screen to Josh Jacobs that was blown up. It wasn't going to work, and he threw it anyways, and it was pick-sixed by Kirby Joseph. Those are the ones you can't have. Those are the ones that have to go away. But I do think some of the aggressiveness has been taken away from Jordan Love, and I want to see it come back now because I think if you try to mess with that going into the postseason, it could lead to even more trouble and even more overthinking. I would like to see them be more aggressive against Chicago in this game to try to get it back on track because, again, you want to balance things out. And early on in the year, it was very much so a Jordan Love where it was like, whoa, he's really aggressive. He's taking shots. He's flinging the pill all around the field. Fun to watch. You're on the edge of your seat, but you're also chewing off fingernails because the inevitable is that there's interceptions coming up. And again, he had 11 in the first 8 games, 0 the last 6. Now I think it's just been swung so far in the other direction that you have to try to find that balance with him and with the passing game to take those shots, take the calculated risk. Take the calculated risk when it's called upon to do so. So we'll see. I don't know. I would like to see that change against Chicago. Maybe that's just the way it's going to be the rest of the season, and then they work on it in the offseason whenever that pops up. Mitch, I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Packers, Bears, final thoughts. Something kind of weird about this game is, like, normally I'd be worried about Chicago spoiling the party or attempting to. I don't know why. Maybe I should be. I'm just not with this game. I hope the Packers don't have that interpretation of how I think or believe this game will go. I just, DJ Moore, Chicago wide receiver 2 weeks ago, said he was already thinking about vacation. He was asked a question about the impending coaching change and how there were going to be no coaches on the staff. And I'm slightly paraphrasing, but he was asked about what he wanted in a new head coach and that whole process for Chicago. And he said he said something like my next thought is vacation and the offseason and blah blah blah. And then he had to go back a couple days later and clarify that I'm not mailing it in on the season and I was asked about the coaching, so on and so forth. And he's probably right, but to even in that moment when you're asked about the coaching, just say something, say player speak or coach speak, and throw out a filler line or two instead of talking about vacation. I just I've watched the Bears play Seattle last week. I watched the Bears play the Lions 2 weeks ago. His team's checked out. They're checked out. It doesn't mean they're going to roll over on Sunday, but this isn't to me one of those. I don't know, Chicago could really surprise Green Bay even though the Packers are a far better team. It's not one of those spots to me. They're flat out bad. They're flat. They don't seem to have the motivation even for a game against Green Bay. That's just how it's appearing to me. So I don't know. This doesn't strike me as one of those spots where it's hey, Green Bay is the way better team. They have the way better record. It's the regular season finale. Chicago knows no matter what, this is its last game. They could surprise Green Bay and sneak. I just don't see it. I watched a defeated team against Seattle, and it was a 6-3 game. Like, Chicago had chances to win that game late, but they looked defeated early on. And the week before that, they were down 20-0, I think, or 24-0 early to Detroit. And I know Detroit's a different beast, but, they only lost to them by 3 on Thanksgiving a few weeks before that. And it just looks like a defeated team that is already thinking ahead to the offseason, already wants to be in the offseason on a beach, feet kicked up somewhere in the sand. And, yeah, I've said this phrase a couple of times this year, like, this is a game for Green Bay where it's like, don't play with your food, but division rivalry factors into it for this one, but not as much as it normally would for me. I watch Caleb Williams' press conferences, and he's saying all the right things. Watch DJ Moore's. It sounds like a defeated team that just wants to turn the page. Do they want to get rid of this losing streak of 11 games against the Packers? Absolutely. Are they going to be motivated enough coming out Sunday to try to do so, to really, try to hammer that in? Chicago fans would like to think so, but I just don't see it. I don't. Watch their last 2 games start to finish against Seattle and Detroit, and they're done. They've mailed it in. If they had the white flag, they would be waving it. And maybe playing the Packers in Green Bay will give them a little bit of a spark, but they need more than a little bit of a spark, to me, to try to take down the Packers in this one. So I hope I'm right. I don't see it. And I don't think I'm sticking my neck out saying that if you've watched the Bears. And even when they were at the beginning of this losing streak, when they were 4-2 and they lost on the Hail Mary to Washington, you're like, this is a pivot point of the season. They can either respond and, figure this out and rally the troops, or it could lead down a dark, dark path. And it has led down a dark, dark path. But I would say even in the middle of the losing streak, when Eberflus was still the head coach, I didn't see them quit or mail it in these last couple of weeks. And again, I know last week was 6-3, but I'm watching that game and I'm thinking Seattle's offense is under the belief that it doesn't need to do anything too special to win this game. Basically, just don't F it up. Like, Gino, don't F it up. Hey, don't fumble the ball. Running backs, wide receivers, just don't fumble. Let's not mess it up. Let's not pile up a bunch of penalties and shoot ourselves in the foot, and we'll win. Like, I wasn't watching a Seahawks team that thought it needed to reinvent the wheel to beat Chicago. It was a very careful design for the Seahawks, and they squeaked it out 6-3, and Chicago had chances to win, but it's a very, very, it's going to sound like I'm piling on and being a jerk, and it's not my intention. Chicago's been a bad team for how many years now, right? The Trubisky era had like one good year and handed over to Fields, who handed it over now to Caleb Williams. And so the Bears are used to these spots where the final game of the regular season, they're not playing for much. And at least this version of Chicago, and I'm sure it's applied in years past, it just looks defeated. Like, the Giants could have had the number 1 pick wrapped up, but the players aren't thinking about that. And they came out last week, and their offense was unstoppable against the Colts, and the Colts were playing for a wild card spot. Colts are eliminated now, but the Colts were playing to try to stay in the wild card race, and the Giants came out and beat the brakes off them. I watched like an Arizona Cardinals team that's been eliminated for a couple of weeks. 2-3 weeks ago, lost to Carolina in a gut-wrencher in overtime to officially eliminate them. Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals were eliminated in Carolina. And the very next week, when they could have just said, whatever, man, like, we're mentally drained, we're out of it, we mathematically are eliminated. Instead, they came out and they went drive for drive in a defensive struggle, like a defensive battle. And they went punch for punch with LA and almost beat the Rams. And if not for a couple of kind of fluky things that happened, probably should have beat the Rams, who at the time were fighting their ass off for the NFC West, which they have now clinched. And so there's different versions of teams who are eliminated, are on losing streaks, were eliminated in, heartbreaking fashion or just devastating fashion that still rallied in the following weeks. I haven't seen that with Chicago, especially in its most 2 recent games. They look done. And I hope they come out that way. I do. I hope they come out that way. And one big thing I want to see is I do believe in the power of motivation, and hopefully it can carry over. I want to see the pass rush get after Caleb Williams, not because it's Caleb Williams and the Bears, because I want this pass rush to have some confidence and some not motivation. I want them to have some confidence, some good juju going into the playoffs, because this pass rush has been up and down, mostly down this year. Hit a good spot a few weeks ago where I thought, oh, maybe they're figuring it out. And then last week was pretty abysmal against Minnesota again. I want to see them leave this game with some confidence heading into the postseason for the pass rush. Mitch, I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I will not have a post-game video up right away. I'll be at the game on Sunday, and I'll be with friends and family after the game, or friends after the game. And so we'll have a video up probably sometime Monday, and then by that point we'll already be looking towards the playoffs for Green Bay. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate all the support. We'll see you next time.